Okay, before we get going on you guys actually doing your render, I want to just point out and kind of mark up this render for, yeah, I guess kind of like a benchmark diagram for you, so you can start to understand the level of detail that we're trying to get at. And some of it you'll be able to see very clearly on the projector, and like the filtering and stuff is pretty subtle in this render, so you might not see it up on the projector. Is it right to go like that for now? All right. So basically, I want to point out like some key components here. You need to start thinking ahead of time about where and when you're doing certain things when you start preparing this thing. So first off, I just want to point out that there's like an area. Well, I could do that a little more accurately, actually. All right, you've got an area about this big. Oh, where are my properties on this one? It's over here. There we go. Let's do a little dash line. Cool. Okay, you've got an area about that big that there's nothing in your render, which is important to note because that means there's that much of your render that you don't have to model, right? You can just throw some Photoshop magic in there and it'll turn into something that hopefully is pretty great. Now, I think, you know, this stuff down here that you're seeing in the street, maybe some of that is modeled, but you can get away with Photoshopping a lot of this kind of stuff if you're really clever. The other thing I want to point out is, I guess, like the use of space and how much you're actually modeling in your space. The good thing I think about this particular space is that very simple furniture fills up the space. So the architecture alone is really responsible for, you know, about all of this. Well, actually, let me do it this way. I'll just do it in a bunch of different colors. This one will be blue. Okay, the architecture alone is largely just that entire block. There's not very much else that really needs to be done. And it's just, you know, simple materials, simple illumination. So if you have some lights in the space, that's going to be very easy for you because there's not, you know, this is a semi-exterior space, so there's not a lot of lighting to be had. In terms of actually modeling things into the model that you're going to have to render out, I'd say anything that casts a shadow, right? So anything that casts a shadow, with the exception of some live objects like people, should be included. So there's a level of complexity to be considered. So like people who cast a shadow, I'll show you how to Photoshop casting a shadow in, but tables, for instance, they have a lot of legs and they have a lot of components to them that need to cast shadows. You'll notice if you zoom in on, oh, that's search, that's not zoom. Where's my zoom? There it is. Whoa. So if you zoom in on these, it's kind of not very clear, but all those wine bottles and stuff are not casting shadows. You probably didn't realize it at first, but yeah, they're not. So one thing you will want to do is, and I'm going to mark this up for you, model your complex objects that are casting shadows. Let's make this with a white background. Okay, and the same thing is going to happen sort of back here. Those objects are going to want to cast shadows as well. Okay, any questions so far? Okay. Other things I want to point out is like how much of the real estate of this screen is actually being captured by active objects that you're photoshopping. So yeah, all this landscape stuff out there is going to take a little while, but in terms of like activity and what's happening with people in the space, because there are largely only two spaces, right? There's a space back here, which isn't very detailed. That scared the crap out of me, by the way. And there's a space up here which doesn't require much detail because it has so much action that's happening behind it. So really all you have to model, whoops, all you have to model are, you know, a few people back here to activate that space, and then a few people up here to activate this space. In this case, you know, they kind of put it full bleed on the right-hand side, but you know, you might actually have some people sort of standing by the table or maybe out in the lawn or something like that, depending on what the activity of your space is. Okay, you don't need to overwhelm it and make it like there's a 40-person party happening in this place, right? This is enough. So I do want to point out that there's a lot of light, so like natural light. So let's point this out. And we're going to say natural light simplifies the render. Okay, that's really important. The natural light is going to allow you to not have to fiddle with like a lot of interior lighting and stuff. So if you have like sunshades and stuff, try to capture more of the ceiling part of your render with those shade elements, and then you won't have to do as much with the interior lighting conditions. And then finally, when you're getting to the materials. Now, this particular render is kind of cheating because there's only one material, but I want to point out to you conditions like this right here, because this particular condition along this edge, it's not modeled accurately. Does it matter to us? Not really. It communicates the idea that we have these wood slats that are creating the cladding for this building. But you didn't even notice, most of you. Raise your hand if you noticed that those materials weren't really lined up. All right, one of you out of like 18. So yeah, I mean, that's the idea, right? Like get it to a point where, and I always talk about return on investment, right? It'll take you maybe, you know, a couple minutes, 5-10 minutes to calibrate a material to get to this level. And then you look at it and you say, okay, that's close enough. Yeah, sure. And then it would take you another hour and a half to model it to get it to be perfectly accurate. Like they're exactly the right size. They're exactly aligned. So I don't know exactly what timeline it is, but it is a pretty significant difference. So focus on looking at the whole picture, like step away from it every once in a while and consider what you have on the screen and whether or not it's worth your time adjusting that particular element, okay? So this is I'm just going to say material calibration should be considered for time. And then the other thing I want to point out, I think, is, well, yeah, I guess furniture too. So the furniture elements that we have here, yeah, modeling the complex objects that are casting shadows is important, but also limiting the amount of objects that you have in the space can be very useful. It depends on the space that you're modeling. So we tend to sort of oversimplify this stuff and pretend like, you know, this is actually how it's going to be built. The cool thing about this building is this is actually how it's built, and there's not very much in there. So, but anyway, that's kind of like a quick rundown on what I think is kind of a good balance on how to approach this render when you get to the modeling phase. So when you look at this render, right, I asked you how long it takes to model this space, right? You said like about a month to model everything in this space. How long do you think it would take you to model everything in that? Assuming your building was already largely done. What's that?
What?
What was that? 30 minutes? It could take you 30 minutes. It's really quick. There's a table and 8 chairs, 9 chairs, and then there's like a table in the back with another 9 chairs, and then like a counter that they're leaning on. That's about it. Okay, that's the magic of this. So as you're planning what view you're going to pick, be thinking about these principles, and then by, what time is it, 7:30? By 8:30, I'm going to start sitting down with everyone to make sure that the views that you're picking are viable views. Okay? Any questions? All right, great, thanks.
What program are you using for the outlining and
That's Bluebeam.
moving on?
Yeah, that's why I love Bluebeam because like it. I do this with my consultants. I'll be there like with a drawing, and I'm just like a technical drawing, and I'm just drawing over top of it. Like, all right, we're gonna move this here. You can actually like cut and paste things. So if the cladding needs like a new like brick veneer or something like that, I can take like a brick from the backup wall and just kind of push it to the front or something. Like, I don't know. You can do some weird stuff like that. But yeah, I've seen people actually use this to like render colors in a way. It's like it's really rudimentary, but they'll be like, "Oh yeah, what if we did kind of like a yellow color here?" And they'll just put like a block up on it, and then they're like, "Yeah, let's lighten it up a little bit," and you'll get close to the color palette just playing around with it. Yeah. Yeah. Anyway, versatile tool.